Call to meeting this general session of the Montgomery County Commissioners. This the 20th day of February in the year 2018. Welcome to everyone here. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate all of you coming out and being with us tonight. First thing on our agenda is the invocation, and we have the Reverend Steve Wilkinson from Troy Presbyterian Church. I think I see him on the front row with the service dog right now. So, Pastor, we're always glad to have you. Thank you for being here.
The dog's calming me down.
There you go.
I know I'm not here to preach. I was reading a passage of Scripture in which the Apostle Paul in Corinth, where he was dealt with he had to deal with a lot of attacks and criticisms and distractions, writes in 2 Corinthians, I resolved while I was among you to know Christ and Him alone. I'm paraphrasing. And my point isn't to preach, but just to say there are times when there are so many opinions and so many things happening and so much pushing and pulling on any leader, and really any community, that it's very hard to remind ourselves to stay focused on one thing, to be about one thing. And so that's in mind as I lead us in prayer tonight. Let's pray.
Thank you.
Lord, I thank you for these commissioners and their leadership. I thank you for this community represented by those who are here tonight who care about our society and about our county and about the people in it. Lord, caring about a society means we have to hear many voices, and it means that we face the challenge to weed out the ones we should really listen to and the ones that we should put on a shelf. Help these commissioners and help all of us to learn how to keep the main thing, to understand clearly what our primary call and our primary role is in the positions you've placed us in, whether it's commissioner, or whether it's an employee of the county, whether it's we who play some other role in this county. Help us, Lord, to have that kind of focus so that we're not distracted and weighed and burdened down by other voices. We pray most of all that we'll hear your voice in all we do. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you. Next thing is Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Woodard.
If you are able, please rise and join us in reciting our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
On our agenda next is the public forum, and certainly we want anybody to speak, whether you've signed up to speak at the public forum or whether you have not. One thing we are having is a public hearing, and there will also be a period at the public hearing about our text amendment that allows for the public to speak. If you're here to speak about the text amendment, we're going to ask you not to come at this point, but you'll have the opportunity to speak when we go into the public hearing. But if anyone's here to speak on any other matter, please raise your hand and we'll be glad to have you up and hear you now. If not, then, Mr. Manager, we'll forego the rules of the public hearing for the public forum for the time being. We have with us Ms. Chrissy, if you'll come up. Ms. Chrissy Haynes, she's an extension agent here with a focus on Leadership Youth Montgomery, or Youth Leadership Montgomery, 4-H, and I could talk about a lot of other things, but we're glad you're here tonight, and we're going to let you have the floor. And I'd like to know, and I think everybody'd like to know who these young students and future leaders are, and maybe even what school they attend, because we got 4 or 5 schools, and maybe even a homeschool represented here.
We do. I'm going to ask them all to come up, and you guys will just stick around. I'll let them introduce themselves to you. Unless you want to. This is our Youth Leadership Montgomery program, and like Commissioner Morris said, they are representative of quite a few schools. So I will let them say their name and what school they go to and what grade they're in for you.
Okay, so I'm Hannah Price, and I'm a junior at UConn. I'm Sierra, I'm a senior at UConn. I'm Stephanie Page, and I'm a senior at UConn. Abigail Hamilton, junior at UConn.
Alondra Hernandez, I attend East
Riley Robbins, junior at West Montgomery.
Bailey Ellis, a junior at West Montgomery.
Cameron Ferguson, junior at Sunday.
Hope Davis, sophomore at UR Charter.
Allie Morgan, sophomore at Montgomery County Early College.
My name's Sarah Lexi, and I'm a junior at UR Charter Academy. My name's Gracie Knight, and I'm a sophomore at East Montgomery.
Stephanie Hyman Reason, I'm a junior at East Montgomery High School.
DeMar Stewart Lobos, a junior at East Montgomery High School.
Ryan Montgomery, sophomore at Montgomery Early College.
Forrest Massey I'm a sophomore at East Montgomery.
I'm Kaylin Carter. I'm in the 11th grade at West Montgomery. Kaylin.
My name's Peyton Byron, and I'm a junior at UR Charter.
My name's Hannah Blankenship, and I'm a senior at West County.
I'm Megan Strong. I'm a senior at West Montgomery.
I'm Lucy McCurry, and I'm a junior at UR Charter.
My name is Barrett Edison, and I'm a junior at UR Charter.
I'm Martin Moore, and I'm a junior at East Montgomery.
Thank you, guys. This is our Youth Leadership Montgomery program, like I said, and this is a year-long program where these young people have committed themselves to a lot of their teacher work days, a lot of time off, evenings, and this coming to your meeting as a part of learning about how local government is run and how decisions are made here locally. We will also learn about state government soon, and we will be going to Raleigh to learn, to talk with our legislators as well. Thank you for having us.
Thank
You're quite welcome. We've got something for you, but we'll, there's a lot of you.
28.
I tell you what, if y'all will make 2 lines down there and come around 2 ways, we'll hand out a Montgomery County pen to each one of you till Mike runs out, then you can come to me until Commissioner Wooten and Anthony run out and come to him. Yeah, there you go. And some of them come around this way. Everybody get one.
Thank you.
Did that pretty well. I got some. There you go. There you go. You're welcome. There you go. You're welcome. There you go. And there you go. There you go. There you go, Barrett. There you go. Folks, when I came in a little early today and all these young folks were here and I went in and spoke to them and told them that they came at a good night. We don't have much on the agenda, but it might have been they should have come when we had a lot on the agenda so they could have seen a lot of things happening. But to give you some, I'm going to do something a little bit off the ordinary. I didn't tell you this because I wanted the commissioners to be here. We've got one commissioner that's absent tonight because he's got health problems in his family. That's Commissioner Matheny. But Montgomery County is divided into 3 districts, 3 voting districts. And we also have 2 at-large candidates. Commissioner Crisco and I are at-large county commissioners, means that when we run for office, everybody in the county can vote for either one of us. And that was in the consent decree back several years ago. I thought the county did some really smart zoning and districting. It almost ensured we have minority representation, and we've had and it also ensures that everybody in the county gets to vote for at least 3 commissioners. Commissioner Wooten's in District 2, so he's got the district, sort of Bisco-Troy, a little bit of Gander, a little bit of Star. District 3, he's got a little bit of Mount Gilead, got a little bit of Gander, got a little bit of down in the Bisco area a little bit. So he's got the district. Of course, Commissioner Crisco and I are at large, and Commissioner Matheny, who is not here tonight, is in District 1. And you can look online and get that district map, I think, and shows you where the districts are. And it was very innovative in how the commissioners decided to construct the districts where everybody could vote for more than one candidate. There are counties where they just got districts, but everybody gets a choice here in Montgomery County, and I think that was well thought out, and I think we'll all agree to that. Sometimes a little hard on us kind of candidates when we run at large because we have to.
Whole county,
Got to do the whole county, but that's the way it is. Now I'm going to do something else a little different since you've had time to sit there and think. We'll even let you ask us some questions if you want to, and that never happens in here, very seldom. But if you've got a question you want to ask any of the commissioners, feel free to do so because we'll try to answer them. You're our future leaders. We need to talk to you. Nobody has any questions? Yeah, she's the one that asked for snacks when we come in. Be glad, I'll tell you what I'm gonna ask you to do, if you'll come up, because we got a mic here, and give us your name and just ask you, why don't you come all the way up here? I know you're not bashful, because you want something to eat from me when you come in, but give me your full name again, and then you can ask a question, to any one of us you wanna ask it to.
Okay, my name is Kaylin Parter, and I just wanted to know, why was the school time extended like 3 minutes to each class?
I can tell you.
There
Or
you
is
go.
this,
The state mandates that you have so many hours of education North Carolina does. So they added 10 minutes onto it per day because to make up for the snow days.
oh, okay. All right, thank you.
That all?
And the reason I know that, I talked to Ms. BOCC last night. Had I not, I wouldn't have known that.
Commissioner Copeland kept us all looking better today. I know
Can I
that.
say one thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd just like to tell you, what Commissioner Morris was just telling you about the districting. Because it is Black History Month, I would, like to let you know that we had what is called a consent decree. The NAACP, which is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, did a complaint against the county because they kind of felt at the time that it was an unfair advantage to voting. And historically, what happened was a judge gave a consent decree and asked that you made districts that was kind of fair. And the reason I'm mentioning this was that's kind of going on right now statewide with the voting districts and rights. So you can know that anything that you do locally can escalate to the state level or the national level if there's enough incentive behind it and enough reason behind it. And that's how we got representation on the Board of Commissioners and the school board here in Montgomery County.
And since that's been 15, 20 years
Yeah,
ago,
15.
long before any of our time, and now Commissioner Wooten has been sheriff. How many terms, Commissioner? Four.
Part of four.
Yeah, and he's been clerk of court, part of 2 terms.
Yeah, 4.
And now he's a county commissioner, so he's been around the game a while. But since that decree was passed, and you know, there was back and forth and debate about it, but it went through with flying colors,
Yes, it
I would
did.
say. We have had minority representation ever since, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Any other questions? Thank you for your question.
That young lady.
Oh, come on up. And we want your name first, 'cause we got to get you on the record.
Stephanie Hymas Riza, and after this Florida school shooting, I was just wondering if there was gonna be any school changes to further protect us.
Can I tell you what I think? And I can't speak for the rest of the commissioners, but can I tell
Go
you how I
ahead.
feel? I think the conversation has got to start about what roles all of us play. We've already seen a lot of conversation about mental illness, and Commissioner Copeland serves on the mental illness for us on the Sand Hills Mental Health. We've seen people talking about background checks. Hopefully, in my opinion, and I'll let anybody else tell you what they think, hopefully we'll get the assault weapons in that conversation somewhere along the way. And this is more of a Raleigh, Washington thing, and probably more of a Washington thing than it is on the local level. But should we inspire our elected officials to start that conversation and start that debate? Absolutely. That's my opinion.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I was just
Anybody else
wondering.
want to make comments?
I'd just like to say it all begins with you. You guys are more in tune to social media than we do. I check mine once a month from whenever. But if you see something that you kind of feel uncomfortable about, just let someone know. And it doesn't make you a bad person or a tattletale or whatever. You're just being safe. And that's one way that we can start it. If you see something that you don't feel comfortable about, or somebody say something, well, I just don't feel kind of right about that, you need to mention that to someone. And then they will look into it. I'm sure the sheriff's department or the school people will look into it.
Okay.
Okay?
That's a great question. Any other comments? A great question. Is the sheriff still here? I was going to introduce him to you. There you go. Sheriff Watkins, stand up so these young people know who you are. This is Sheriff of Montgomery County, Sheriff Chris Watkins. And he'll be glad to talk to any of you about anything, I'm sure, when we have the meet. Any other questions? This is fun. We don't put ourselves on the firing line like this very often.
Never seen anything here.
Come on up. And the commissioners, I hope you don't have any problem with this.
No.
No.
I'm Chloe Van Cannon, and I just wanted to ask about the highway issue, because I know that one part going towards Albemarle with the very curvy part, and that's it feels very dangerous to me every time I go around it, and
It's not too inviting, is it?
no.
Little background on that, and again, the commissioners can weigh in as well. Several years ago, what we call the Troy bypass plan started, several years ago, many years ago, actually, and it became reality. And what they are doing is they are now constructing, I would say, the final stage. I think it's supposed to be finished, what we hear, 19, is that right, Commissioner? And that is part of the byproducts of having to having placement of traffic where they can finish the road. I'm like you, that's a little bit steep in there, that's a little bit sharp curve, and I understand it. Fortunately, I don't think we've had any accidents there, but they've got it pretty well marked. But at the end of the day, what's gonna happen, so you'll see the vision further on out there, is the 4-lane will start right below that, on down another mile or so, or half a mile, and it will come back in over close to the bridge. You've seen that. Well, the state has already started the surveying and talking about property from the end of that one all the way to Albemarle. And the future plans are to, and we may never see the future plans, but the future plans are to have the road system opened up, Charlotte to the coastal area. Am I right about that, Mr. Woodard? One of the reasons and one of the things we're talking about tonight, and you're going to see this in just a minute, is a public hearing about cluster developments. And that's primarily based on some of the larger developments that we have. We think, and we know, sometimes we don't know, but we think we do, and have done enough research to know that that highway is going to feed a lot of traffic in to the area and make it easier to get to where they're going, to this area that we're talking about could develop. And we're hoping this cluster development we're doing, as a matter of fact, there's some people waiting to start building, am I right, Mr. Manager? Or hopefully they are. We're hoping that traffic pattern will help us with that. So that's one of the stumbles we're going to have to put up with until they get that thing open. But I agree with you, it's a sharp curve out there. But it'll open up soon. It's going to, within a year, I hope.
Okay.
You want to make a comment, Mr. Wood?
I'm sure if I will. I get a lot of calls about road conditions in the county as county manager. And I usually ask, who lives on a county road? No, you don't. Nobody lives on a county road. There's no such thing as a county road. The state of North Carolina maintains the roadway system, and in the municipalities in town, the towns have control over the roads. The county has no authority over the road network. County road is just a misnomer, if you will. I usually call the DOT when there's a complaint, a stop sign down, pothole too big, so forth and so on. In the plans for this roadway construction, they are very detailed as the placement of every cone, every stripe, every reflector. I'll be glad to let them know that there is concern over there, and it is a hairpin, but what you're dealing with is they're going to raise that old road bed up to the level of the new one. So you're talking about a tremendous amount of dirt, and the space they having to work in is very confined, and so that's why it is. I agree with you, there should be more slow down, no really slow down signs there. But I'll be glad to pass that along.
Your voice has been heard. It's going to,
Thank you.
Anyone else? Don't be bashful, because we ought to do this with you when you're in here. Nothing, not anything else? Sure? Because we're gonna close this and you won't be able to do it again. Not tonight, anyway.
Do you guys have any questions about your personal, your career days?
I think I'll also be glad to tell you what our careers are. Mike?
I work for the Department of the Army at Fort Bragg.
That's good.
Like, do you like doing this? Like, were you elected or
Oh, you're
appointed?
talking about this career?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And were you elected or appointed, and what do you represent?
We'll start.
Yeah, I'm the at-large commissioner, as Chairman Morris stated, and Like I say, I was commissioner at Town of Bisco for, I guess, about 12, 15 years, and then was the mayor for 2 years, and got out of it, and they came and asked me would I run for county commissioner, so that's where I'm in it now.
This is my,
Yeah, I'm good.
this is my third term as commissioner. I got 4-year terms at large. It's ending this year. And was elected, was not appointed. I'm a banker. I've been working for First Bank for 46 years.
Yes, sir.
As that's my career. And you ask if I enjoyed it, yes, I have enjoyed being a county commissioner. It's fulfilling. You got a lot of challenges. As an old saying goes, there's too much month for the money most of the time, meaning you don't have enough money to do everything you want, but it's fulfilling. Hopefully, we're helping your quality of life. We're really working on the education system now and trying to do some things about the early college. Some of the early college that just started, and I could go on and on and on, but I've enjoyed being a county commissioner.
I'm a retired postal worker. I worked up until last year when I experienced some illness, so I had to retire early. But I volunteered. I served on the Board of Elections, served on the Mental Health Board, several boards throughout. I was always one of those wanting to help somebody kind of people. So I was the original Black Panther. So I've always tried to help. So I've enjoyed being a county commissioner, and I represent from Canada, like Commissioner Morris said, from Canada to the Mount Gilead area. Most of my area is kind of rural, except for Mount Gilead and the part of Canada. But I really enjoy serving and helping people.
Okay, I'm currently retired. Most of my adult life has been in public service. I started out with the Bisco Police Department as an officer in 1971, so many years I don't like to think how long. And I was appointed police chief in 1975. And then in 1978, I decided I was going to run for sheriff, and I lost that election. In 1978, Eben Wallace was the incumbent sheriff. But after about 2.5 years of his term that he won, he left and went to Raleigh, so I was appointed to finish out that term. And then I ran for 3 terms of sheriff on my own, and was lucky enough to win all 3 of those. And then I retired from law enforcement in 1994. And then in 1998, the clerk of court retired, the current clerk of court retired. And so I decided, because I needed something to do, and I was still fairly young, I ran for clerk of court in 1998 and was elected to 4 terms, and I did leave 2 years early in that 4th term and retired. I got retirement age and went ahead and retired. And so most of my career has been in public service, and I ran for county commissioners, and I'm the district of basically Bisco, Star, and Candor, and part of Troy is where my district is. And this is my first term as county commissioner. But most of my adult life's been in public service, and I've enjoyed it.
And don't let it sell short. We've got a great county manager, and I think he needs to tell you what he does every day, too.
We have all night, do we?
Commissioners, thank you. I think it would help to let everyone know what these gentlemen oversee in the county. And the best way for me to do that is to introduce you to the people that do the work. Andrew Gahagan, if you'll stand up, is the Planning and Zoning Director. The county has ordinances as to what you can build, where you can build it, and how you can build it necessarily. Andrew's on the agenda tonight, but he is the keeper and the enforcer of that zoning ordinance. You may live in one part of the county where your home has to be a stick built. You may live in one part where you can have a single wide. You may want to put a business beside your house, and if the commissioners have not zoned it as such, Andrew's going to stop you from doing that. But he will help you best he can to get it the way he wants to. And so all the ordinances applied to land and land use, that's Andrew. Brian Helms, if you'll stand up. Brian is the Director of Communications for the county. The 911 center, when you call emergency, that is a county function. And so Brian oversees the telecommunicators. There's 2 people on shift 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. In addition to that, anything that you plug into the wall that's a computer or telephone or whatever else, Brian's the one that has to fix it. And so he has a very wide-ranging job. But computers and communication is his forte. Belinda, if you'll stand up. And CD, if you'll stand up in the back, we have in total with everything a $40 million budget these gentlemen oversee. And these folks right here, and Misty, are you in the room? Okay. That's the two key folks in the finance office, and so they keep us straight. They report to the state and to the local government commission in compliance. You met the sheriff. Anything that goes wrong, he's responsible for. Working with him, Robbie, if you'll stand up, is emergency management. And so Robbie's job is to work with the volunteers on the fire departments, the rescue squads, the EMS that the county contracts with. It's also his responsibility to put all the plans in place if we have a hurricane, if we have a snowstorm, if we have a disaster, that we can bring folks in here and get everything cleaned up. If we lose power, big storm, Robbie's the one that puts the shelter together and maintains that. So him and the sheriff are looking out for our well-being. David, if you'll stand up. Everybody's familiar with the public library here, and we also have public libraries in every town, and so that's a function of the county in conjunction with the Sand Hills Regional Center, and so David oversees all the library functions. We employ about 225 employees full-time with the county, and Renee, if you'll stand up, she's the HR director, and so she looks after all our benefits and all our employment forms, workers' comp, Family Medical Leave Act, and so forth. The Register of Deeds is an elected position. Melissa, if you'll stand up, she is the caretaker of every vital record, so to speak. So your land transactions and birth certificates and everything else downstairs, she's the one we trust the most. Our largest department is Department of Social Services. Stephanie, if you'll stand up. And so Adult Protective Services. And so if your mother or grandmother is being cared for at home or cared for facility and you don't think she's being cared for right, we take care of that. Child Protective Services, if you see a child that's being mistreated, that's a county function, we take care of that. Medicaid, food stamps, workforce, all that is a function of the county that these gentlemen oversee, and Stephanie's in charge of that. Molly's Cooperative Extension with Chrissy, I think y'all are familiar with their functions there. If you turn on water in the county, unless you're on a well, the person who's responsible for keeping your water clean is Chris Hildreth. Chris, if you'll stand up. We take water in from the river, we treat the water, and we sell to all the towns in the county, as well as the town of Robbins and Moore County, and we have about 5,500 rural customers on our water system. About, how many, 450 miles of water line? Roughly speaking. So a lot of water lines in the county that commissioners and other commissioners before them had the foresight to put that infrastructure in the ground. Chris is also in charge of all of our facilities, and we have quite a few. The sheriff's in charge of the jail. We have the county jail. We have the courthouse that we're responsible for maintaining, this building, the water plant system, the 911 center, and dozens of other buildings, and so Chris is in charge of that. So who did I leave out? We also do animal control. That is a large function of our time. There's more animals in the county than there are people. And we have a long way to go as far as, for a lot of people in the county, of how we treat animals, and so we do have a lot of issues with animal control, but we try to serve the people well in that function. Soil and water, as far as erosion and storm control, that's a purview of the county as well. Y'all help me out, who am I missing?
Health Department.
Health Department, Mary was in the meeting just earlier, and so Health Department is in the purview of these gentlemen, women and children, communicable disease, general health practices, and general treatment is that. So in total, there's about 20 unique departments and functions that the county government does, and these gentlemen, this board right here oversees all that.
All right. Thank you guys for letting
Thank
me
you.
have this on.
Thank you. Good. I'll do one more if we got one more. Again, we really appreciate you being here. It means a lot to see this many young people interested and come out. It's a blessing to have you here. Thank you so much. Next thing on our agenda is the consent agenda. Have a motion to approve.
I'll make the motion.
Got a motion from Commissioner Crisco to approve. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Commissioner Copeland. Any discussion? Not all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The next item on the agenda is the public hearing we've been talking about. Mr. Gay Hagan and Mr. Woodard.
I will let Andrew start.
We do have a text amendment tonight, TA 01-2018. The County Planning Board is requesting a text amendment to Article 8, cluster development of the county zoning ordinance, specifically to reflect the current subdivision ordinance standards, clarify and add additional open space requirements, remove maximum area for cluster developments, and remove subjective language. The cluster development standard does deal directly with subdivisions. However, it's included in the zoning ordinance rather than the subdivision ordinance for various reasons, primarily because it deals with lot sizes, which is still included with the zoning ordinance. The future land use plan very clearly supports cluster developments as evidenced by policy 1.2, 6.1, 6.4, and 6.10 of that land use plan that's detailed in the consistency statement, including the agenda packet and in the attached staff report. Essentially, those items are basically speaking to innovative, flexible land development, trying to break from the norm, so to speak, to fit the area better. The proposed amendment tonight adds significant standards to strengthen open space requirements and remove language which may be subjective in nature to streamline cluster development requests, similar to what was changed in the subdivision ordinance in 2015. Subjective language requirements are very difficult to ascertain for the planning board and developers and the public at large. Such language would include terms that are in the ordinance now that we're proposing to remove, exhibits special atypical design features, provides an alternative design concept. Those are very difficult items to describe and to determine whether or not a specific request has met that requirement. Such language, again, is largely open to interpretation. Could go either way. The board rules one way. It could harm someone else. It's just general to get rid of uncertain language like that and streamline this process to whether or not the request does meet the requirement. Essentially, these would be black and white standards, which follow suit with the subdivision ordinance, where we also remove similar subjective language to replace with objective items. Subdivisions and cluster developments do not authorize new uses. They are not rezoning requests, and they will not alter the underlying zoning district. These types of requests do not authorize additional density. They merely allow lots to be grouped together through a density transfer rather than spread out equally throughout the project area. They do also impose additional open space requirements. Standard subdivisions, which do not utilize the cluster development option, require only 5% open space to be allocated. A cluster development requires 10%. This has actually been in the ordinance since 1996, so that standard is already in place and will not be changing as a function of this request. We're actually adding more standards to strengthen that open space requirement. Section 9, cluster developments in watersheds, which is included in the attached ordinance amending the Montgomery County subdivision ordinance. So to speak briefly to those in the audience, essentially to amend an ordinance, you have to pass an ordinance. So what we actually do when we do a text amendment request like this is draft what is called a ordinance amending the Montgomery County zoning ordinance. So it is a little double speak, but just to explain that to everyone here tonight. So essentially what we're requesting is that the ordinance is amended to better reflect the subdivision ordinance. Cluster developments and watersheds, that features language which is taken directly from the NCDEQ watershed regulation standards, their administration code. The standards were not created or initiated by the county. They reflect the requirements of the state watershed program. In 1993, the county was mandated by state law to enforce watersheds at a local level, and we do that. I have spoken with their folks at the watershed program and speak with them very regularly on how we can administrate that program, and to date, they've been very pleased with what we do, so we're working very well with that program right now. The planning board did meet on January 22nd, 2018, and voted by a vote of 4-0 to recommend the amendment as written to the Board of Commissioners. I'll be available to answer any questions the board might have on the amendment tonight.
Any questions from commissioners? Mr. Wood, you got anything to add?
I do. We have an ordinance in the county, is what Andrew is addressing, obviously, and when staff feels like maybe somebody is doing something they shouldn't do to the detriment of the county, then we request to the Board of Commissioners that they change the law. Or, as in this case, we feel that the existing ordinance is too restrictive and does not allow what we would feel would be to the benefit of the county. And so those are the two times that you change a ordinance. When we do that, we usually have an issue in mind. And so you go in with the strike-through pen and you say, well, that's not conveying what we want it to convey, or that's the problem that we've encountered here, and so forth. And while you're going in with that specific issue in mind, you do try to look at the whole and make any other changes. It's an imperfect process. You can read something, as Andrew has read this thousands of times, and become blind to certain parts of it. And so, you know, like our subdivision ordinance, I think, Andrew, we had to go back after we adopted that and make changes to it, and I think there's changes he wants to make again with that one. But
We'll see you in about 2 months.
Yeah, it is a work in progress always, and so, you know, we don't admit to being perfect, but we do try to address the whole. But we did have a letter that we received today, and there's a public comment period that's going to follow, Andrew, where people can weigh in on this. I agree with it, I don't agree with it, and so forth. But we did receive a letter, and I'd like to read that letter into the record. The commissioners have a copy of the letter in front of them. This letter will be available on our website in the board packet tomorrow if anybody wants to reference it. But after I read the letter, I think the writer did have some good points, and I would like to propose to Andrew, and through Andrew to the board, maybe some modification to the document that's in the packet. I don't think any of those are really substantive changes, but let me, with that said, read this letter. It's about 5 or 6 paragraphs. It is from Nancy Rupert, P.O. Box 561, Troy, North Carolina. Dear Commissioners, this statement comes to you as a result of the proposed text amendment to Article 8 of the Montgomery County Zoning Ordinance. The stated intentions of this amendment is in part to clarify open space requirements and remove subjective language. I have concerns about this proposal expressed as follows, and I will call this her point 1. In Section 3, it states that certain zoning ordinance standards may be modified, including lot area, setback in yards, and open space. Would this allow ignoring setbacks so that someone could build right up to the property line? Question. How does the possible modification of open space fit with Section 6, which is minimum open space requirements? In other words, it's difficult to tell from the language whether Section 3 and Section 6 might contradict each other. Second point, Section 6, minimum open space requirements, could perhaps be better clarified. Letter F, first sentence, might be intended to read binding rather than bidding legal instrument. And letter G allows decks, trellises, and patios to be part of what's designated as open space as long as there's no roof as part of the plan. This seems to defeat the purpose of setting aside the open space. And the third point, Section 9, cluster developments in watershed. Paragraph B states, built upon areas shall not exceed that allowed for the critical area of balance of the watershed, whichever applies. There seems to be some language or punctuation missing that would give the sentence meaning. Also, it seems subjective to say that, quote, all built upon areas shall be designated and located to minimize stormwater runoff impact to the receiving waters and minimize concentrated stormwater flow. Unless there is a well-recognized statement, there wasn't identified, that determines this. In fact, having as many as 500 plus homes on a 272 plus acre near any lake area in our county in itself presents the potential to have an adverse impact on the quality of water that most of Montgomery County families drink for drinking water, families use for drinking water. If we complain about Union County trying to steal some of our water supply, we should also take every measure to protect that same water supply. She finishes with, I very much understand how we need growth in our local economy, and to help speed that along by further development of our county's valuable properties, I am simply requesting clarification of this proposed amendment and expressing my belief that this land can be developed successfully and sustainably. And so I will go back, if I may, and address those 3 points one at a time. The first one, Section 3, the certain zoning ordinance standards may be modified. I'm going to skip down to the writer's second part of that question, and she is saying, does it not contradict itself between Section 3 and Section 6. Section 3 says the commissioners, one of the things that they can modify is open space. And then Section 6 says there's a minimum of 10% open space. Well, which one is it? Is it a minimum, or can they modify? Again, as I started off with, we had the existing ordinance, and Andrew went in with the obstacles in mind. That was one section from the old ordinance he didn't touch. But the writer makes a good point. And so if we will look at the proposed zoning amendment, and that is Section 3, if I can find it in mine, I had it marked here and I pulled my pen out. So it's first page, Section 3, certain zoning ordinance standards may be modified. This identifies what the commissioners can do. A is lot size, B is lot width, C is public street frontage, D is setback in yards. My recommendation, Andrew's recommendation, is yes, this is one area that we can correct while we're doing this. Items E, F, G, and H can also be stricken from the proposal. So, building separation, height of fences and walls, off-street parking, and open space, those are addressed later in the document. So there's no need to have them in that section, and I can understand how the writer was confused. You start off in Section 3 saying, you know, you can change it, and then you go over here in Section 6, it says, here's what the requirement is. So we certainly agree with that, Andrew, if you do, that an amendment to the ordinance here would be to strike what is going to be Section 3, certain zoning ordinance standards may be modified to strike E, F, G, and H. I think that is the main point. The first part of the question, could somebody build up to the property line? Yes, this board can decrease setbacks. The requirement later in the ordinance that you can only build upon 50% of your lot stays in place. And so even though the board may at some point approve, or the planning board may approve, I guess, to get close to the property line, you still can only build on 50% of the lot. So to me, the market would control that. Who would buy a house that's an inch from somebody and half your lot is still open? But the answer to the question is yes, the commissioners can, or the planning board can approve adjustments to the setback, but we do agree with the second part of the question, and it was confusing, and we apologize, and we will ask the board to include the striking of E, F, G, and H. The second question, Section 6, perhaps would read better to remove the typo. We certainly agree with that. It should be binding rather than bidding, and so we certainly thank the writer for noticing that and correcting. The second part of her point 2, letter G allows decks, trellises, and patios to be part of what is designated as open space as long as there's no roof as part of the plan. This seems to defeat the purpose of setting aside open space. I can't speak for the writer, but I think there's a misunderstanding about the open space requirement. In this ordinance, 10% of the total has to be open space accessible to the public. That's one issue, that doesn't change. The part about the decks refers to your individual lot. Your individual lot is not public access area. As the board knows, we've had trouble in the past with variance requests that somebody wants to build a deck, but our ordinances was measuring from the extrusion instead of the footprint. And so what this clarifies is you can only build on 50% of your lot. But in measuring that 50% built upon, we're not going to count that deck. If it doesn't have a roof on it, it's not on the buildable footprint. Because we've had a lot of problems with that in the past. And I think that's standard now, is it not, to count from the baseline footprint and not from eaves and overhangs and stuff like that.
No, we haven't amended that. That's still.
But I mean, as far as statewide.
Generally, when it comes to this particular one, it has to do mostly with the watershed. And the watershed reflects back to general statute, which determines that decks and trellises are not to be counted as built upon area if the deck is a slatted deck. It even counts as pools, as the water area is pervious structure. So that's where that really comes from.
But again, I think that the writer was talking about the public open space area, and that's not impacted because what you're allowed to build on is your private property, and we're not going to count the deck as part of that buildable footprint for the reason stated. And so the recommendation for the second point is to make the typo change, but we do not think we need to change the not counting the decks and the trellises as part of the buildable area. The third point, section 9, cluster developments and watershed. That section remains unchanged from the old ordinance, and basically while Andrew did not touch that is because that is really not in his purview or the county's purview. When you apply for an erosion control permit, the state is the one that's controlling the watershed. The language that they point out there about build upon areas, that's coming directly from the North Carolina admin code. I agree with the writer that at some point in time, whoever cut and pasted part of that admin code, the last two words, whichever applies, it makes no sense as it's read. But again, the reason Andrew didn't touch that was because he doesn't touch that. I think we could certainly strike the whichever applies from that sentence to make it read better. But again, I will supply to the board, and I'll ask the clerk to put this in the minutes as well, the admin code that deals with the watershed. And that's something that's really not in Andrew's purview. So that's why it was not touched.
I mean, we do administer the program at a local level to a certain degree, but when it gets beyond needing a soil erosion permit or something like that, that goes straight to the state. We don't have a local stormwater program here. We also don't allow a high-density watershed option right now. That's something I've been looking at, but we don't have one in place. So anything that occurs within the watershed is a low-density option only.
So of the 3 points, we certainly agree with the first one that there was some confusion and seemed to contradict each other between section 3 and 6. And if we'll do the strike through, that should clear that issue up. Thank you again for finding the typo to correct that. And we can do changes to section 9, but I don't think it's really going to impact what this board or what Andrew can do.
Mr. Gay-Hagan, anything else?
And I'll ask Andrew to add anything to that. I was rely on Andrew's expertise in this. He educated me before the meeting, as all staff does.
Any questions from the board to Mr. Gay-Hagan or Mr. Woodard? Anything else, Mr. Gay-Hagan? Stay around, you may have to answer a question or two. All right, this is a public hearing, so the public certainly has the speaking time in this. Anyone like to speak on this particular matter? Yes, ma'am, come on up and give us your name and address before you start, please, ma'am.
Velvet Motzinger, 185 Old Thayer Mill Road, Troy, North Carolina. And I do want to apologize to Andrew. I didn't catch this during the planning board meeting, and I want you to know that this was very painful to go through in the planning board meeting, and he did a very nice job. In section 6, letter F, I'm not sure if you can make this change today, but I would like for this to be looked at. It says a permanent conservation easement, and I have an easement myself, so I started thinking about that, and an easement can mean a lot of different things, and there's not a definition in here as to what that easement should be, so that leaves that pretty wide open. So I know an easement can have trees on it that you can cut down, you can have crops on it, so I'm not sure if that to me, that seems like that needs to be defined a little bit more. And then I was talking to Nancy, and we were talking about this C, an equivalent legal tool that provides permanent legal protection. And I'm not sure what that legal protection is as approved by the county attorney. So I don't know if that legal protection is referring to similar to a conservation easement, which again, how is that defined? And that's all that I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see if we have anyone else. We'll just hold those comments. Mr. Woodard, if you will. Anyone else? If not, now, Mr. Woodard.
And again, I don't know I think certainly everything in an ordinance needs to be clarified, because you're going to have somebody that's going to argue the definition of A when they want to do something. And I certainly like the other writer, thank Velvet for looking at this and asking those questions. I would just, for the board's clarification, ask Andrew, what powers do we have as far as if somebody tries to impede on that area that's been designated as an open open space? So this subdivision's got to have 10% of that open space in perpetuity. There's got to be a legal instrument that identifies that. I'm assuming, Andrew, that when the planning board approves this, or when you sign off on plats, that instrument has to have existed to the satisfaction of the county attorney for you to sign on it.
Yeah, I mean, it would be attached at the same time the map is recorded. And even then, we'd have to see those easements or protection and document ahead of time before we can approve a final plat at that point anyways. But what the intent there is just that the open space is to remain open in perpetuity. You can't use it for building purposes predominantly is what that's there for. Okay. That it's really to be for the use and enjoyment of the general neighborhood, because logically, by having a smaller lot size or having a smaller yard, we're making up for the yard somewhere else on the property that's accessible to them.
But that instrument would have to meet your satisfaction and the satisfaction of the county attorney to.
Correct, and we would need to have the draft of that at the time the final plat is ready for approval, which the planning board would have to approve of at that point as well, so.
Any other questions from the commissioners? Mr. Gahagan, you have anything else? Mr. Woodard?
No, sir, thank
And
you.
I think there's not anyone else that wanted to speak. Mr. Woodard, this vote would be to approve this with the changes that you have recognized. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
Would you go over those, please, sir?
I will do my best, and Andrew, you will help me out here. The recommended changes are in section 3, certain zoning ordinance standards may be modified, is to strike through EFG and H, Andrew?
Yes.
Correct.
Section 6 is to correct the typo so that it reads binding legal instrument. And again, those are the only two recommended changes. I think we could clean up section 9 to read better, but since, again, we talked about the erosion control permit in the watershed and Andrew's role in that I don't recommend clarification this time, because I'm sure we'll be back to this document at a future date. And we'll try to get as much of it as we can.
Good. Any other questions from the board? If not, pleasure of the board
I'll make a motion that we pass these recommendations
with the corrections.
with the corrections.
Thank you, Commissioner Crisco. Let's have a vote, a motion from Commissioner Crisco. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Commissioner Wooten. Are there any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Next thing on our agenda is the county manager's report, and you may have an action item on there too, Mr.
I do have one. The first one's really for information, just to get it into the public record. We discussed this as far as the financing for the new Montgomery Central High School. The bond sale is February 26th. The market volatility that we're still having pricing calls. CD is on one tomorrow, I'm one on Thursday, as to what rate we think is going to sell, and so we still have our fingers crossed on that. March 5th, 2018 will be the closing date, and so we'll need the chairman in attendance and the clerk to execute the documents to close on the interim financing for the Central High School. As we discussed, though, and what item is on the county manager's report is a letter to the United States Department of Agriculture requesting them to reserve additional funds. As the board may recall, we had, in rough numbers, $68 million from the USDA. The county's match, the county's share, had to be spent first, and then the USDA money next. As the project was over budget and the county was looking to have put more money in, our money following that original formula would have to be spent first. Well, there's a $4 million contingency let's go through construction and that contingency's not hit. Well, under the existing formula, the USDA's contribution will be less. Well, that's not what the county wanted. We want all of their 68 million in and the county money to be triggered at a later date. And so to do that, the USDA said, well, just go ahead, keep your keep your first funding at this level, let us do our 68 million, then request the 4 million contingency on a separate loan. That does not mean we have to take the loan. Our intentions are not to take the loan, is to use the cash reserves. The board has already allocated the 5 million to the fund to cover that. But again, we just wanted to touch whatever bases we had to touch to make sure the USDA money was expended first before the county money, was the whole purpose there. Again, it's not a binding document. If we do at a later date, if something unforeseen happens and we have to use that 5 million on other capital projects, then we can follow through and do a secondary USDA loan. So it gives us some leverage. So it makes good sense. And right now, all the USDA wants is a request. And so I have drafted that letter and going to sign it. But I wanted to just touch base with the board again if they had any questions about that.
A copy of that letter is in our packet.
That's right.
Yeah.
The action item on the agenda tonight is for the Montgomery County Airport, and that was one of the things I failed to mention, is that we do have an airport, and the commissioners oversee the functions out there at the airport. We are doing a fuel farm to get aviation fuel out at the airport. Every year, the federal government does an entitlement, a non-primary entitlement, and so they put basically $150,000 in the county's account for the county to do projects at the airport. This does not require any matching funds from the county. The board had identified what the priority projects are. Perimeter fencing was the next item on the list after the fuel farm. And so we want to go ahead with a phased perimeter fencing project to use our primary entitlement money. We get to bank 4 years. If you haven't used it by year 5, 1 year falls off. And we certainly don't want to give any money back that the federal government is putting for airport facilities. And so this contract is a scope and services with our engineer of record to proceed with that project. And again, this is funded through the North Carolina DOT Aviation and through them from the federal non-primary entitlement monies. But it is an action item for the board to approve this contract as it is above the $30,000 limit that I'm authorized to sign.
You have a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Got a motion from Commissioner Copeland. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second from Commissioner Wooten. Any discussion? Not all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll ask Chris Hildreth to step forward just briefly if he wants to discuss this. And I apologize for it not being in the packet, but this is something we just received today. It relates to the Central High School project, and it has to do with the outside lighting. And Chris, I'll let you explain what Duke Progress does and how they do it. But in essence, you have in front of you, and again, we will make sure it is online in your board packets tomorrow for the public to view, is an easement that Duke Energy needs for the county to sign to allow them to access the area to take care of the outside lighting at the new high school. And Chris, you tell us why that program's important, if you will.
That's right. In order to install and maintain their facilities, it's pretty typical Duke Energy Progress easement. Where the grantor is granting them the right and access to come in and use the driveways and whatever else is reasonable for them to install and maintain the electric facilities on the site. And so it's all about the facilities that are their facilities, electrical poles, transformers, things like that. And it describes the easement in here as 30 foot from center line of any overhead utilities and 20 foot for any underground utilities and 10 foot around each facility above ground, stationary transformer type thing, 10 foot on all sides. And so if it's the board's pleasure, this will allow them to enter into a contract with us stating that they will supply the power and maintain those facilities on our site.
Any questions?
And I'll just add too, Chris and the project manager Jay are working with Duke as far as rebates, incentives, and the lighting package and mechanical systems there. And so they're garnishing or gathering up a rebate money for us too. So thank you for going to that extra effort.
And we need action on this too, don't we, Mr. Manager?
Yes, sir.
We have a motion to approve.
I'll make the motion.
Motion from Commissioner Crisco, thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Mr. Copeland, thank you, sir. Any discussion? Not all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chris.
The other items are the county reports, as we mentioned to the audience in attendance tonight, all the different functions that the county does, and those department heads submit reports to the Board of Commissioners, letting them know what activities and what challenges and obstacles they've overcome. And so I'll be glad to ask any of the department heads. I think the audience saw from Andrew's presentation that the department heads are very knowledgeable of what they do, and I'll be glad to answer any questions about their report or ask the people who know better to come up and answer the question.
Any questions from the commissioners? That means they give us really good information, like that.
I did have one, Jack. The fuel farm, is that, I guess, still on schedule for October? Is it looking like October, like?
Yeah, the DOT, you can have them, DOT Aviation, you can have them in the meeting with you every time, and they're part of the preparation package, and then when you send it to them, a month later, you get a reject letter back, and you're like, well, you drafted the thing, or whatever. They did reject a part of that project. It was some technicality. James Moose with Avcom went back and made that correction and resubmitted it. It's still on a time, it's still moving forward, but long ago I have stopped speaking for the DOT Aviation. They have made liars out of me every time. When they say they're gonna do something, they kind of run at their own pace. They're very good people, and they do help us. The airport rehab project was approximately $2 million. They funded that, oversaw that. They've done a lot of good for Montgomery County, but they have a lot of checks and balances in the DOT Aviation. And once it gets up the ladder to one of their engineers, if somebody doesn't like that I wasn't dotted, buddy, you're going to start over again. So it's still moving forward, but we did have that hiccup. I don't know what the impact is going to be timeline-wise, but yeah, it's fully funded. We're just waiting to put it out on the street and get the bids and award it and move forward.
Other questions? Not anything else, Mr. Wood?
No, sir, thank you.
All right. Again, to the youth leadership, thank you for being here. We've certainly enjoyed your presence tonight. We'll be around and be glad to answer any other questions after the meeting. Feel free to talk to any of us, and we'll be glad to talk with you. I think we've about covered all the business we can cover here tonight. This meeting is adjourned.